Hello and welcome to Run Testers. My name's Nick, and in this video we're going to be comparing the Nike Alphafly 2 and the Nike Vaporfly 3. The Alphafly 2 and the Vaporfly 3 are the current generation of Nike's racing shoes, with the Alphafly 3 being geared more towards the marathon and the Vaporfly positioned more as the all-distance racer, but they are both pretty good at all distances. The Vaporfly 3 is the cheaper shoe. It is £235 in the UK, $250 in the US, whereas the Alphafly 2 is £270 in the UK and $275 in the US. The Alphafly is the heavier shoe, as you'd expect from looking at them. It weighs 247 grams or 8.7 ounces in my UK size 9, whereas the Vaporfly 3 is 206 grams or 7.3 ounces in my UK 9. Nike doesn't give the official stack height of the shoes, but it's fair to say they both go right up against that 40mm limit set by World Athletics. Onto the design, you've got an atom knit upper on the Alphafly 2 with a fair bit of heel reinforcement at the shoe to try and create some stability. You've got a ZoomX foam midsole, Nike's PU-based foam with a full-length carbon plate running through it. And under the forefoot, you've also got some Air Zoom pods, which Nike say return even more energy than the ZoomX foam. And then on the outsole, you've got a couple of strips of rubber at the back. Pretty good forefoot coverage there, not too much exposed foam, and obviously a big cutout there that shows off the carbon plate in the middle of the shoe. With the Vaporfly 3, you've got a Flyknit upper with a very open design at the front in particular. There is a internal heel counter, but it's not quite as supportive at the back there as the Alphafly 2 is. Got a full-length ZoomX midsole with no AirPods at all in there. It's just ZoomX all the way through with that scooped carbon plate running through it. A couple of midsole cutouts there to reduce the weight a little bit. Now on the rubber coverage, there's not only a little bit less of it, I'd say, than on the Alphafly. You've got good forefoot coverage and a couple of strips at the back, but it's a little bit thinner than on the Alphafly, and that's one of the big changes Nike made to the Vaporfly 3 compared to the 2, was to make the outsole rubber a little bit thinner to allow a couple of millimeters of space into which they put more ZoomX foam to add more cushioning to the midsole.
So when it comes to fit, I ran in a UK 8.5 in both these shoes. That's true to size, that is my size. And in both of them, I would recommend going true to size. I think that's gonna be pretty much bang on what you need. You will expect to get a roomier fit, roomier in around the toe box in the Next Percent 3 than you do with the Alphafly. The Alphafly, much more kind of locked in, much more hugging, much tighter generally across the whole foot. Still a little bit of space in the toe box, but there's much more room in the Next Percent 3. Arguably not quite so secure, so yeah, there is that to consider. If you like it really tight and secure, then the Alphafly Next Percent 3 might give you a bit more of that sensation than the Vaporfly 3, but I would go true to size.
On the fit of the shoes, I have been very happy in a UK 9 in both of these shoes, which is my normal running shoe size. It's the size I've worn, I think, for all of Nike's racing shoes, and I tend to wear on most running shoes. Haven't really had any concerns with fit either. The upper on the Alphafly is really very supportive and comfortable one, and the Vaporfly one is really lightweight, stripped back, but holds the foot well around the heel and midfoot. So yeah, no concerns with either shoe in my normal running shoe size. So I've done a lot of running in both of these shoes, more in the Alphafly 2, obviously, as we've had it a bit longer. I've done 100k in the Vaporfly 3 and well over 200k in the Alphafly. I've raced marathons in both, as well as shorter races, and done a lot of training in them. And it's fair to say I like both of them a lot. I don't really think Nike has released a bad carbon shoe yet, with that ZoomX foam and carbon plate combo really delivering a very, very impressive ride on all the shoes that's had it. They are pretty different shoes though. The Alphafly 2 was the one I tested first. You know, it's a bigger shoe in many ways, including having what feels like a lot more cushioning in the midsole, even though in theory the stack heights must be pretty similar. It's a more propulsive shoe as a result. You really do get big booming bounce from the Alphafly. When you line it up on a straight road, you can run very fast really in any kind of race. It's obviously geared more for the long haul, but I did a lot of short races. I got my 5 mile PB in this shoe, did a good 10k in it as well. I've done sessions doing short reps, and when you are in the right conditions on a good surface, nice straight road, it's a really outstanding ride that just delivers a huge amount of propulsion. So I ran a 2:29 in the shoe in the Valencia Marathon last year, and at times I was quite surprised by that time. Like, I had gone quicker than that in Berlin earlier, but then I had eased off a bit on my training, got COVID, went to Valencia, not necessarily looking for a sub 2:30, but I thought I'd go out at that pace, and it just felt very controlled in the shoe and manageable throughout. Like, especially the last 6k, when I did worry that the size would start to become a bit of a problem with the Alphafly, which never really did. You just get that nice, supportive, propulsive ride from the shoe, and it felt like I could just tick off those last few kilometers feeling good, even as I was falling apart, as you always are at the end of a marathon. On the shorter races, I think it's less great in those closing stages. You can still run quick in them, but you've almost got to settle into the rhythm the Alphafly dictates. It's not really ideal for quick changes of pace or dashing around a corner at the end of a race and things like that. It's more of a steady, rolling, rhythmic shoe that you can really just bounce along in and run very fast in as a result, but it doesn't feel quite as agile as some other shoes, including the Vaporfly 3. This is just a lot lighter and nimbler and better when attacking corners too. It's not a very stable shoe, it's still the Vaporfly, but it really does give quite a lot of confidence to go in attacking corners into it, because it is so light, and it's great for accelerating away from them as well. You can really pick your feet up and turn over very quickly in this shoe. It's a little bit more cushion than the Vaporfly 2, and that is quite telling in longer sessions and the marathon I found with this shoe. I ran London last weekend in the shoe, ran a 2:33 there on not a lot of very good marathon training, it has to be said. I've been a bit kind of niggly and I've had a few weird injury problems and haven't been able to rack up the long runs, but I felt pretty good in the shoe. Like I ran a 1:18 first half and then did a second half at 1:15 around my marathon pace, and I didn't think I'd be able to hold it all the way, but managed to, even as I was getting very tired at the end there. It's a different experience to the Alphafly, but similar but different in a way. Like you still got that Zoom X midsole, you're still getting that bounce and that propulsive feeling underfoot, but with the Vaporfly it just helps, I think, turn your feet over a bit more. And as a high cadence, quite shuffly runner, especially at the end of marathons, did feel like it was helping a lot to have such a lightweight shoe on that still does deliver that nice bounce. You can run in it in that more controlled way, which you do in the first half of a marathon, I did anyway. But then at the end of the race, I think it feels just a bit more agile than the Alphafly. Now, not to say that's better. I've run good marathons in both and I really like both of them for the marathon, but it does feel like a slightly different way of running where you've got to settle in with the Alphafly, embrace that big design, get into a rhythm and bounce along. Whereas with the Vaporfly, it does feel like it works to keep tipping you forward and just keep you moving and turning over no matter how you're kind of running by the end of a race. So yeah, both do have slightly different feels. I think the Vaporfly 3 is closer to the Alphafly than the Vaporfly 2 was, but it is still distinctly a Vaporfly, that lighter shoe, that more aggressive grounded feel, just with a little bit of extra comfort. Alphafly delivers a bit more bounce, but the trade-off there is the weight you have on the shoe, which doesn't always work perfectly at times in races. One area I think the Alphafly will have the edge though is durability. I have got like 230k on this shoe and it doesn't really look like it's taken much of a beating at all, especially around the back of the shoe. Now, this is one area where I tend to get a bit of wear around the heel of shoes. It's actually more on the left shoe. I have a slightly different foot stroke there, and you see the Vaporfly is flaking a bit more there. I think it's a bit thinner. I think you've got slightly less rubber coverage. It's not the kind of thing that I expect to compromise performance, but I have seen quite a lot of flaking on the left shoe of my Vaporflies already after 100k, and I've got a little bit of that on the Alphafly on my left foot, but not that much. And the midsole feels just as good, and I think you're probably going to get a few more miles out of the Alphafly 2 as a result. It just feels a little bit more resilient, whereas the Vaporfly is very stripped back. Nike's really gone out the way to remove a lot of stuff off the shoe to try and make it very lightweight and feel very racy underfoot, but the downside of that might be you lose a little bit of durability on the outsole.
So I've just done a side-by-side mile with the Alphafly NEXT 2 on the left foot and the Vaporfly 3 on the right foot. The standout thing for me really here is how the Vaporfly NEXT 3 now feel less different than the Vaporfly 2 compared to the Alphafly. Again, I said it in the Vaporfly 3 review, it's just much less direct, it's much softer than the NEXT 2. And I think the Vaporfly 3 now feels much less like a really stripped back minimal kind of racing shoe compared to the sort of high stack Alphafly. It's come kind of closer up in terms of that overall kind of cushioning bed and the platform to run off. The Alphafly, I think, it definitely feel kind of more sinking in the cushion and more response. It's softer underfoot. It's less stable, I would argue, than the Vaporfly NEXT 3 because of that. The Vaporfly NEXT 3 is still sort of slightly more compact underfoot, that feeling when you kind of land and then spring. It compacts kind of quicker and releases faster than the Alphafly, but I think actually the Alphafly is a much more punchy shoe, and you really notice the higher stack. The other thing you really notice as well, again, is kind of the race hugging fit that you get from the Alphaflys. They hold across the top of the foot much better. That kind of booty fit definitely holds the foot more securely in place. On the Vaporfly NEXT 3, it's much kind of roomier, much kind of looser. There's much more wiggle room in the toe box. It's much airier in and around the toe box. So there's a bit more room for the foot to move in there. Whereas, you feel like you're in a kind of race seat in the Alphaflys. And the other thing I used to say, I always thought the Alphaflys were a little bit better if everything went wrong, because you got that high stack of cushioning, it runs right back into the heel. A bit more so, I thought, than the Vaporflys, where you had a lot of ground contact coming up from the NEXT 2. That if you got deep into a run or you rock back on your heels, it wouldn't protect you quite as much. the Vaporfly NEXT% 3 now move much closer to that and the Alphafly feel. So you're still going to get, I think, more protection from the Alphafly NEXT% 2. That cushioning, you know, it's still there. It's still going to give you more if you're really back on your heels. But again, the NEXT% 3 have taken a step towards the Alphafly. So then for me, I think the key differences here between these two shoes amount to a couple of things. I think the Alphafly still has more spring, more energy. It's still, for me, a bit more of a faster, sort of more punchy shoe. I think the AirPod under the front makes a difference in terms of that kind of toe spring that you're going to get and that kind of connection and the kickoff from the ground when you're kind of rolling through your stride. And I think that's going to lend itself still to being arguably a better kind of marathon race shoe than the Vaporfly NEXT% 3, although both of these I would happily race a marathon in. I think I could run fast times. These are PB potential in both of them. I think the other thing that's different, I definitely think that the Vaporfly NEXT% 3 is a bit more light, a bit more nimble, a bit more agile. It's the kind of shoe that I think you can do much better cornering. So if you're looking at a tight, twisty course, whether it's a 5K up to a marathon distance, I think the Vaporfly 3 is going to cope better with anything where you're going to have to turn tight corners. I think if you're looking for something that has more connection with the ground, the Vaporfly 3 still has more connection than the Alphafly, obviously because of the big stack, that ZoomX foam. It's not got as much as it used to have with the Vaporfly 2, and that difference, the distance between those two shoes, I think has been narrowed quite considerably. Now, another thing that's different though, the Alphafly, it's much wider in the forefoot and in the heel. There's a much kind of wider base of that ZoomX foam across the whole foot. And while, again, the Vaporfly NEXT% 3, I think are coat better when you're running ragged towards the end of a marathon, I still think you're going to get more protection from the Alphafly than you will from the Vaporfly 3. It's not as pronounced again as it was between the Vaporfly 2 and the Alphafly, but I think marginally, I think there's more here in case things go wrong in the Alphafly NEXT% 2. And then I think the other big difference here is kind of all about the fit. If you want like a tight, locked in race fit, really hugging, not much room for your foot to move, then you're going to get that with the Alphafly NEXT%. The Vaporfly NEXT% 3, it's much roomier, there's much area, there's much more kind of wiggle room for the toes. It just feels a little bit looser overall. So if you don't like that really sort of tight, cramped, locked in feel that you get with the Alphafly, then the Vaporfly NEXT% 3 might be a shoe that you should go for. So I'm going to try and keep my verdict pretty simple on these two shoes. I think there's real kind of toss up. They're both good marathon shoes. I think they're both good half marathon shoes. I think you could do 10Ks in both of them. I think when you get down to sort of 5Ks, again, you could run faster. I think then you start to sort of lean in where the Vaporfly 3 is probably a better shoe, particularly if you're on a course that's going to require a lot of cornering. Then I think the Vaporfly 3 comes into its own there. If I was going to pick a shoe to go and chase my marathon PB with the Alphafly, I think you're just getting more back in terms of spring and energy. I think you're getting more protection from the cushion if things go wrong. Actually, once my foot is in it, I think that sort of hugged, dialed in kind of race fit sort of feels a bit more secure over the marathon distance. Though if you like it roomy, definitely go for the Vaporfly 3. I think the Vaporfly 3 has moved towards the Alphafly in terms of the way the cushioning kind of feels. I think I still preferred the Vaporfly 2. There was a big difference, and I quite like the directness and the kind of firmness that came with the Vaporfly 2. And I think you've lost that with the Vaporfly 3. So for me, I don't think this shoe does enough now that's different or better than the Alphafly NEXT% 2. And so if I was choosing one shoe out of both of these to do all of those races in, I would definitely go for the Alphafly NEXT% 2, though I think the Vaporfly 3 is arguably better on corners and potentially a shoe you'd lace up to do maybe shorter, faster stuff, maybe short intervals and things.
So these are both great racing shoes, but I think overall the Vaporfly being a cheaper shoe, a lighter shoe, I think a slightly more versatile shoe does give it a little bit of the edge. It's a shoe that I would certainly reach for shorter races in particular. The Alphafly is still a good short distance racing shoe, but I would reach for the Vaporfly definitely for things like 5K, 10K, and personally I think I prefer it for the marathon as well, just because it has got a nice level of comfort now, slightly more comfort than the Vaporfly 2 had, and just feels that little bit more controlled and supportive in the later stages of marathons as a result, while still being very light and enjoying that really stripped back feel on your foot. The Alphafly is a fantastic shoe all round. Comes to a marathon, it really is a bit of a toss-up, I'd say, but it might depend on what you're really looking for in a shoe. If you try the Alphafly, you really, I think, will be impressed by how bouncy and booming it is, but it just doesn't work for lots of runners who just prefer the lighter shoe on their feet for racing, and that's what the Vaporfly offers while delivering a very similar level of propulsion underfoot. I'd say overall it pretty comes down to the fact that I think when you look at their weaker areas, which are not weak areas as I keep saying, but they're weaker areas, Vaporfly is a better marathon shoe than the Alphafly is a 5k shoe, I'd say probably. So it just ends up being a bit more versatile, really good for runs at any distance. So Alphafly does feel a bit more geared to the marathon. One counter to the value argument would be that I do think the Alphafly is going to be a more durable shoe. It's certainly held up incredibly well for me after like 230k of running so far. If you have one carbon shoe in your rotation, you maybe are geared more towards marathons, then the Alphafly might be the one to go for, because you can use it for short events. It's a very good short distance racing shoe, and it's going to last a good year of racing, I'd say. Vaporfly, the jury's still out on that front. 100k in, it's showing a bit more wear than I've seen on past versions of the Vaporfly even. So I will be interested to see how that carries on from here. At the end of the day, it's a shoe that you want to really excel in on race day, and for the moment, I think the Vaporfly is a shoe that gives you the best opportunity to do that. So that's our comparison of the Vaporfly 3 and the Alphafly 2. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you have a big preference when it comes to the Nike shoes? Please do like, subscribe, ring the little bell, and we'll see you next time.